All right, let's talk about one of the weirdest, most overlooked questions in the entire Warhammer 40K universe. What the hell do people actually use for money in a galaxy that's constantly on fire? It sounds like a joke at first. After all, this is a setting where planets don't just burn metaphorically, they literally burn. Civilizations collapse on a weekly basis. Hive cities collapse into cannibalism before they collapse into rubble. The warp devours shipping lanes, pirates raid across segmentums, and half of your salary might just get eaten by a demon if your bank used the wrong astropathic channel. So in all this chaos, what's worth anything? What survives? What still matters enough that someone somewhere is willing to kill or die for it? The terrifying truth is, value in the 41st millennium isn't based on gold, paper, or digital numbers. It's based on power, obedience, survival, pain, and sometimes teeth. It's an economy twisted by desperation and shaped by apocalypse. Whether you're a lowly manufactorum worker trying to bribe an overseer for an extra ration, or a rogue trader negotiating a deal that might cost 100 lives, currency in the far future doesn't behave like it does in our world. It's inconsistent, brutal, and deeply political. And yet, somehow, it works. Somehow, despite the constant wars, mutations, and annihilations, people still trade. They still pay. They still owe. But don't expect one answer to what money means in Warhammer 40K, because every faction, every planet, sometimes even every city has its own idea of what's worth something. This isn't just a story about coins or credits. This is about what people believe has meaning when the universe itself is coming apart. So let's break it down. Let's take a journey across burning stars, shattered empires, and the darkest markets of the Imperium and beyond to figure out what in this damned galaxy is used as currency. Let's start where most of humanity actually lives, the Imperium. A crumbling bureaucratic nightmare held together by duct tape, dogma, and the blood of its citizens. When you talk about currency in the Imperium of Man, you're not talking about something sleek or universal. You're talking about a patchwork economy where value shifts depending on which hive spire you're in, who your planetary governor is loyal to, or even what decade the administratum finally updated their records. It's not an economy, it's a fossilized parody of one, but it still runs somehow. Barely. Most of the Imperium uses something known as thrones, sometimes called imperial thrones or throne gelt. It's sort of the de jure currency of the Imperium, issued by the administratum, technically standardized and theoretically used across a wide range of planets. But here's the kicker. Thrones are only relevant where the central power of the Imperium is felt. In the core worlds, or segmentum solar, sure, you might actually find traders and officials dealing in thrones. But out in the fringe, on the millions of backwater planets, where the light of Terra is more rumor than reality, thrones are as useful as a purity seal on a lasgun battery. People there trade in water, in labor hours, in bullets, in grain. Even where thrones are accepted, they're not always physical coins. More often than not, it's a bureaucratic notation, a number logged in an OS archive, approved by a scribe whose job is to do nothing but triple stamp financial confirmations. Money moves slower than war. Some fans say there are still places where ancient cogitators process transactions issued by planetary governors who died centuries ago. But nobody dares delete them, because maybe deleting those records is what sparks a crusade, or worse, an audit. Now, the deeper you go into the machine of the Imperium, the more absurd it gets. A lot of Imperial workers, especially in hive cities, aren't even paid in thrones. They're paid in ration chits, oxygen vouchers, or production quotas. Imagine clocking in for a 10-hour shift at a Promethium refinery and getting paid not in money, but in a stamped paper that entitles you to 2 boiled protein cubes and a single respirator filter. Welcome to the lower hive. These people don't trade in wealth, they trade in survival. And this barter economy becomes so institutionalized that entire black markets spring up around it. Want better filters? Hope your cousin works security. Need pain suppressants for your kid? Trade your next week's water allotment. And then there's tithe points. Oh yeah, because the Imperium doesn't just run on money, it runs on obligation. Every planet owes something to Terra, be it manpower, minerals, weapons, or psychics. The value of a planet isn't what it can buy, it's what it can give. And within that system, tithe quotas become a form of currency themselves. Some planetary governors hoard tithe exemptions like gold. Others trade them politically, offer extra bodies to the Astra Militarum in exchange for relaxed inspection schedules or more favorable sector assignments. It's a grotesque but deeply logical system where your worth isn't measured in thrones, but in what part of your population you're willing to sacrifice. There's also this theory going around in fan circles that some Adeptus Arbites precincts have their own internal currencies, used to reward informants or shift the balance of power in Underhive territories. These are rarely official, but when the enforcers themselves are corrupt, and they usually are, then things like Arbite tokens or infrared clearance slips become as valuable as money. In many cases, even more valuable. Because it's not about trade, it's about access, about favor, and in a world where everything is rationed, favor is currency. And then there's the military. The Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum, has its own bizarre pseudo-economy. Technically, soldiers are paid in thrones or the equivalent. But in reality, most guardsmen live off requisitions, looted gear, and supply drops. Want a better laser gun? Find one on a corpse. Want medical care? Hope you survive long enough to earn a commendation. There are stories of regiments using teeth, alien skulls, or even enemy dog tags as informal currency during long deployments, because sometimes the only thing that matters is what your commanding officer thinks has value. The further you go, the more twisted it becomes. The ecclesiarchy has entire cathedral ships that run on donations, indulgences, and sacred relics. There are priests who consider an authentic tear of a martyr worth more than a starship. And don't even get me started on the nobility, those who still live like pre-fall aristocrats, hoarding cultural wealth like ancient wine bottles, pre-imperial jewelry, or even manuscripts written in High Gothic. To them, money is beneath them. What they trade in is prestige, bloodline, and ritual. So when someone asks what's used as currency in the Imperium, the honest answer is, whatever still holds weight in a world that's forgotten how to count. Thrones, sure, but also pain, privilege, position, and power. This is an empire where a stamp from the right bureaucrat can save a planet, and a missing chit can doom an entire family line. Money isn't just about buying things, it's about surviving the system. And sometimes, surviving is the system. Now, here's where things start to get really strange. If thrones and chits rule the streets and hive stacks, then credits, real, formal, administratively blessed imperial credits, are what grease the wheels between stars. This isn't something the average manufactorum worker ever touches. Credits are the high-level currency of the Imperium's great movers, planetary governors, rogue traders, segmentum lords, and of course the institutions powerful enough to operate beyond a single system. But how do you even run an economy across light years of space, where time itself breaks down in the warp? That's where the weird, haunted, bureaucratic magic of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica comes in. Because in the 41st millennium, there is no galactic internet, no FTL communication network, no stable data relay system. If you want to send a message from one planet to another across the stars, it has to pass through the mind of a psyker, a soul-burning, soul-crushing psychic channel carved through the howling madness of the warp. And somehow, that's how money moves too. Imagine you're a merchant on a world in the Segmentum Pacificus, and you want to buy 2,000 crates of bulk promethium from a refinery orbiting a dying star in Ultima Segmentum. You can't just click Buy Now. You have to contact a sanctioned astropath who encodes your request, financial, formal, filled with ritual phrasing and numerical catechisms, and then launches it across the immaterium to a matching astropath on the other end. The message might take hours, days, or even weeks depending on warp currents and the psychic strength of the channel. And when it finally arrives, the refinery's overseer has to trust that the credit figure you attached is both accurate and redeemable. Credits in this system are like promissory notes backed not by gold or a central bank, but by the authority of the administratum. They're essentially psychic IOUs, ledger entries recognized by the Imperium's financial archives, certified by the appropriate Munitorum offices or trade guilds. And yes, those offices are prone to losing paperwork for literal centuries, so a large part of interstellar economics comes down to reputation. That refinery might not move a single barrel of promethium until your merchant house's name is verified through 5 layers of Imperial record keepers. Some fans speculate that high-value transactions are accompanied by more than just psychic messages. There are rumors of soul-bound encryption keys, bits of your identity psychically encoded into the transmission so that only the right party can decode and verify it. These are supposedly used by rogue traders, inquisitors, and other high-clearance operatives to bypass the usual delays and confirm massive transfers without risk of forgery. Of course, they're also incredibly dangerous. If a message like that gets intercepted by a psychic entity or misrouted into the warp, well, you might end up funding a demon prince's next murder spree. And here's the thing, credits don't really exist in a physical form. You can't carry around Imperial credit chips like in some clean sci-fi setting. You might have a stamped data slate verifying an account balance or a cogitator-locked vault led by a Mechanicus-approved code string. But most of the time, credit is trust. It's record-keeping. And in a universe where records are kept by scribes who may or may not have finished their last paperwork 500 years ago, that trust is terrifyingly fragile. It's part of why entire noble houses rise and fall on the back of a few financial messages gone wrong. If a tithe doesn't arrive, if a debt isn't recognized, if a psychic relay misfires, entire planetary economies collapse. There's an infamous example some fans bring up, the so-called Sable disjunction, when a routine credit transfer between Segmentum Obscurus and Solar was delayed for over 30 standard years due to warp storms. By the time the funds arrived, the recipients were all dead, the issuing house had been excommunicated, and the planet that was supposed to receive the goods had been declared heretical and burned. And the credits? Still technically valid. So yeah, you could say that interstellar economics in Warhammer 40K is less about exchange and more about ritualized trust. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, ironically, becomes the spiritual backbone of galactic commerce. Without them, the whole system crashes, and that means that commerce in the Imperium is deeply entwined with the psychic fabric of the warp itself. There's a theory I've seen floating around in fan circles that the Imperium doesn't really want to fix this system, because if they standardized digital communication or introduced non-psychic networks, they'd lose one of the last things tying the galaxy together, dependence on Terra. The psychic bottleneck becomes a method of control. It's not just about the risk. It's about the power to delay, to censor, to choke. The Administratum can control an entire subsector's trade by misplacing a few astropathic messages. And let's not forget the dark corners of this system. Black markets thrive on broken or rerouted credits. Pirate lords capture astropaths just to forge psychic messages. Chaos cults imitate Imperial codes to trick planets into making supply transfers that end up in heretical hands. The warp corrupts even currency. And yet, this madness continues to function. Not efficiently, not sanely, but enough to keep the galaxy spinning for one more nightmare cycle. So when you hear that a planet was paid in credits for a shipment of weapons or tithed psychers, don't picture a neat wire transfer. Picture a half-mad, blinded telepath screaming numbers into the void of hell while praying the demon listening doesn't decide to eat the message. That's currency in the Imperium. That's trust. That's commerce. If the Imperium trades in thrones, chits, and psychic IOUs, then the Adeptus Mechanicus runs on something entirely different: knowledge. To outsiders, that might sound poetic, maybe even noble, but trust me, it's anything but. For the cult Mechanicus, knowledge isn't about enlightenment. It's about hoarding, controlling, worshipping. Theirs is an economy built not on coins, but on blueprints, and the most valuable ones are practically holy relics. Let's talk about STCs, standard template constructs. If you're even a casual fan of Warhammer 40k, you've probably heard whispers about them. Ancient machines, pre-imperial tech from the golden age of humanity, capable of producing entire lines of devices, weapons, or infrastructure with perfect efficiency. For the Mechanicus, finding a fragment of an STC isn't just a breakthrough, it's a religious event. Entire Forge worlds have gone to war over corrupted printouts from these things. You could hand over a crate of priceless artifacts to a Magos, and they'd shrug. Show them a cracked sliver of an STC schematic for a forgotten plasma cutter, and they'd probably offer you a fleet in return. What's wild is that these things don't even need to work. A theoretical file, an ancient engraving, even the memory of someone once seeing an STC fragment is enough to set the gears in motion. There's this infamous story fans love to debate, the Archon Protocol incident, where two Forge worlds spent nearly 50 years locked in a resource war over a corrupted data slate that might possibly have contained part of an STC for self-replicating cogitator units. The data turned out to be irrecoverable. Didn't matter. Both sides declared the war sacred and kept fighting until the Mechanicus High Synod stepped in. But knowledge in the Mechanicus economy isn't just about STCs. It's any knowledge. Blueprints, rituals, instruction scrolls, even access to restricted dogma. You don't just buy a plasma rifle from the Mechanicus, you receive the right to use one, along with 100 pages of liturgical permissions and encoded blessings. They've turned knowledge into a closed circuit, where every exchange is a sacrament. And just like with money, not everyone gets equal access. Some Forge worlds are considered richer not because they have more resources, but because they know more. If a minor Forge world wants access to high-tier weapon blueprints, it has to offer something of value, maybe a rare mineral, maybe servitor labor, but more often, its own discoveries. The Mechanicus loves to barter one mystery for another. It's like an endless tech cult version of Pokemon trading, only the stakes are entire planetary economies. That's how their internal markets work. A Magos biologist might approach a Magos cybernetica to request a certain neuron splicing protocol. In exchange, the biologist might hand over a partially decoded instruction set for a Xenos symbiotic armor interface. No money changes hands, just data. And the thing is, every transaction is logged, in theory. The Mechanicus keeps vaults upon vaults of data scrolls, encrypted hexcant archives, and subdermal data tattoos that track who knows what and who owes what to whom. It's less a banking system and more of an obsessive-compulsive ledger of techno-religious debt. Now there's another layer to this that's just as fascinating: dogma, religious permissions. Because in the cult Mechanicus, not all knowledge is created equal. Some blueprints are deemed too sacred for general use, others are too dangerous. Some are classified as Ordo Reductus, meaning they can only be accessed by those with the proper oaths and augmetics. So access itself becomes a currency. You can't just buy a forbidden design. You have to earn the right to know it. That might mean decades of loyalty or the successful execution of a holy crusade. In some cases, it means sacrificing your humanity, literally trading flesh for the right to install forbidden data. That's where the whole barter system really gets terrifying, because within the cult Mechanicus, your body is also a form of currency. Not in the crude, flesh-peddling sense of the Dark Eldar, but in the deeply unsettling way they measure faith by augmentation. The more you replace, the more trusted you become. A lowly tech acolyte with 5 organic fingers is basically a nobody. But someone who's replaced half their brain with sacred circuitry, now that's someone who might be trusted with the truth behind a Mars-forged reactor. So in a sense, every servo limb is also a down payment toward deeper knowledge. Some fans like to speculate that the highest echelons of the Mechanicus, those magi who've seen the core protocols of Mars, don't even perceive economy the way we do anymore. They exchange ideas so vast and abstract, so far removed from baseline human understanding that we couldn't even interpret the terms of their trades. A signal pulse, a gesture, a recursive binary code whispered into new spheric silence. And yet, whole Forge worlds pivot their production lines based on these exchanges. One pulse, one decision, and an entire planet starts mining instead of building, sacrificing instead of researching. You also see some Mechanicus splinters starting to bend the rules, especially in frontier Forge worlds or explorator fleets far from Martian oversight. There, knowledge becomes more practical, more desperate. They'll trade weapons for food, power cores for navigation maps, secrets for sanctuary. And while Mars may frown on this behavior, the truth is, they need it. Even the tech priests can't sustain themselves on hymns and incantations alone. In the end, the economy of the Mechanicus is both ancient and alien. It's not capitalism. It's not feudalism. It's a techno-religious maze where thought is treasure and understanding is the one true currency. Every line of code is sacred, every schematic is worth blood, and every Forge world hums with the echoes of a million debt chants, each one begging, bartering, or bargaining for just one more spark of lost knowledge. When you step into the realms of chaos, you have to forget everything you thought you knew about value. Currency here isn't measured in weight or numbers. There's no coinage, no ledgers, no economic systems in the traditional sense. What matters to chaos is intent, desire, suffering. The Chaos Gods don't trade in goods. They trade in promises, in transformations, in the very essence of what it means to exist. In the warp-drenched kingdoms of madness, your soul is both your wallet and your payment. And the higher the stakes, the more unholy the bargain. Among Chaos worshippers, the act of offering is the transaction. There's a raw, brutal honesty to it. If you want power from Khorne, you don't wire him credits. You spill blood. You give him skulls. And not just any skulls, but worthy ones. Slain champions, defiant enemies, brothers turned traitor, each one a currency more sacred than gold. There are war bands that measure their status in pyramid-shaped mountains of skulls, each one inscribed with the name and rank of the fallen. It's not just ritual, it's commerce. These trophies become offerings, proofs of loyalty, and a method of gaining divine favor. Some say that in the deepest pits of the Eye of Terror, you can actually buy weapons, armor, or entire demon hosts using nothing but dedicated blood rites. Not metaphorically, literally through blood poured into sacrificial fonts and screamed names echoing through warp-torn cathedrals. Slaanesh? Oh, that gets darker. In the domains of the Prince of Pleasure, sensation itself becomes currency. Pain, ecstasy, torment, rapture, all quantified through acts so intense they reshape the soul. The wealthy in Slaaneshi cults aren't those with material things, but those who have felt more, who have pushed their flesh further, who have sacrificed every limit of sanity for the sake of sensation. I've read fan interpretations where the inner circles of Slaanesh's temples hold auctions, not of objects, but of memories. The whispered scream of a dying angel, the touch of a dying god. Moments bought and sold like luxury spices, passed psychically from one broken mind to another. And then there's Nurgle. Papa Nurgle doesn't want your money. He wants your decay, your willingness to let go, to surrender to entropy, to find joy in decomposition. His followers trade in infections, in viruses, in gifts of bloated generosity. There's this one tale, probably apocryphal but too good not to share, about a renegade warband that traded an entire Forge world's worth of contaminated food in exchange for a plague so unique it sang in 7 harmonies as it killed. They weren't paying with poison. They were paying with love in Nurgle's twisted way. You give him your suffering and he gives you immortality, rotting, generous, warm. Tzeentch is where it all gets fractal. The changer of ways thrives on complexity, on secrets, on plans nested within plans. Among his followers, knowledge is the ultimate currency, but not in the Mechanicus sense. It's not about what you know, it's about what others don't. A whisper in the right ear, a hidden betrayal, a lie that spawns 10 new paths. Tzeentch cults are said to trade not in objects but in potential. They barter for outcomes that haven't happened yet. I once read a fan theory that Tzeentch demons can be bribed with dreams, raw, unformed hopes of mortals that the demons can feed on, shape, and eventually manifest into twisted realities. And in return, they offer changes, mutations, not random ones, but gifts tailored to a desire you didn't even know you had until the moment your spine began to blossom wings. Mutation, by the way, is a currency all its own in chaos. It's not just a side effect, it's a marker of investment. The more mutations you bear, the more deals you've made. Tentacles in place of arms? You probably bartered your loyalty for unnatural strength. A third eye that sees through time? You traded away your ignorance, perhaps even your own past. There's this deeply unnerving idea that chaos rewards are cumulative, not just in effect, but in meaning. The most powerful champions don't own wealth, they wear it. Every inch of warp flesh, every demonic limb is a receipt from the dark gods themselves. And let's not forget about souls. Souls are a universal currency among the ruinous powers. Some say each soul has a flavor, a resonance that makes it more or less desirable depending on the god. A psyker's soul? Delicious. A child's soul stolen before it can be tainted? Unusually pure. The soul of a traitor who renounced his faith at the moment of death? Priceless. There are chaos sorcerers who construct entire economies around soul trafficking, binding, storing, and auctioning them off in shadow markets across the Eye of Terror. These aren't allegories. These are literal soul vaults, cages made of sorcery and pain, where the essence of living beings is locked away, ready to be traded like coinage. It's also worth noting that chaos economics aren't stable. There's no inflation, no deflation, just escalation. You give more, you get more, until you lose yourself completely. Every deal is rigged to end with you, hollowed out, and warped into something new. But by then, you might not care. The most terrifying part is that many chaos followers believe they've made good trades. That what they received, power, immortality, purpose, was worth the price. And who's to say they're wrong? In the realms of chaos, economy isn't a system. It's a theology of exchange. A blood-stained ledger of pacts and offerings where every transaction leaves a scar, sometimes on your flesh, sometimes on the galaxy. And if you ever wonder what something is worth to a chaos worshipper, the answer is always the same: whatever they're willing to sacrifice, which in the end is everything. If there's one place in the galaxy where the very idea of currency gets flayed, stretched, and stitched into something grotesque and unrecognizable, it's Commorragh, the Dark City, the festering heart of Drukhari society. You can't understand how they measure value until you accept that these aren't just pirates or raiders. They're predators who feed on agony, who quantify pain, and who trade in suffering the way others trade in spices or gold. The Drukhari don't just want power. They want to feel it, to extract it, and to twist it into something tangible. In Commorragh, pain is wealth. But let's be clear, this isn't just metaphorical. The Drukhari have literal technology that captures the pain, terror, and soul essence of their victims. It's not just that torture is fun for them, it's profitable. A single raid into real space, where a few thousand Mankey are captured and brought back in chains, isn't a victory because of resources stolen. It's a jackpot because of torment harvested. Every scream, every convulsion, every moment of psychic despair can be distilled, refined, and stored like currency. There are devices, agonizers, torment racks, soul snares that don't just hurt their victims. They preserve the emotional energy like psychic batteries. These get traded between homunculi, sold in shadow markets, and used to pay for everything from gladiator pit contracts to access to higher arenas of power. One fan theory even suggests that some cabals maintain entire pain banks, vaults filled not with coin, but with essence, stored trauma from centuries of raids, carefully labeled and cataloged, ready to be spent. You want a new witchblade forged in the bleeding foundries of Commorragh. You don't pay in thrones. You bring a jar of bottled madness extracted from a dying imperial saint. Need a favor from a homunculus coven? They'll want something that screams, a living, twitching offering that can buy their interest for a few days. And don't even think of bargaining without tribute. In this city, offense is debt, and debt is a death sentence. Or worse, an invitation to endless payment. And what's most twisted is how they view expenditure. For the Drukhari, spending pain doesn't diminish their power, it enhances it. Every act of cruelty they commit replenishes their own vitality. They don't age the way mortals do because they siphon life from others. Torture is both their fuel and their currency. Some Archons live for millennia without ever feeling time's touch, their youth preserved by a constant drip feed of inflicted agony. That's why they keep real space raids going, not just for sport, but for survival. There's a whole economic layer tied to performance too. The arenas of Commorragh aren't just entertainment, they're investments. Witch cults gain prestige and resources based on the suffering they deliver to their audience. The more elaborate, the more artistic the pain, the higher their value in the twisted markets of the Dark City. A single duel that ends in a spectacular display of agony can secure a witch's standing for decades. They become commodities themselves, walking expressions of economic status, owned, traded, and sponsored by rival cabals. Then there are the Homunculi. These are the true bankers of Commorragh's agony economy. They don't just trade in pain, they craft it. They sculpt it like art. They are known to create entire creatures bred solely to suffer in new and exciting ways, and these abominations become both spectacle and coin. A pain engine isn't just a weapon, it's a statement of wealth. It's a moving vault of psychic agony, and the more unique the torment, the more it's worth. I read a fan breakdown once about how homunculi exchange favor through what they call soul tithes. Not actual souls, but slivers of them. Memories, fears, identities, peeled away from captives like skin and stored in shimmering vials. These are traded among themselves both for influence and for practical use. A drop of imperial guilt, a scream of traitor regret, an echo of Aldari grief. It's disgusting, but in the logic of Commorragh, it makes terrifying sense. The more exotic the emotion, the more valuable it becomes. But of course, not everything is formal. There's an undercurrent of raw barter, where debt and favor operate like shadow currency. You owe an Archon a favor, and that debt might hang over your cabal for centuries. Or it might be passed along, sold and resold, until someone you've never met knocks on your spire's door and calls it due. These debts are often settled not in resources, but in victims, living flesh delivered on hooks. And if you fail to deliver enough pain to balance the books, the Homunculi have creative ways of making you pay with your own nerves. One of the eeriest ideas floating around fan circles is that Commorragh itself remembers these debts. That the Dark City, being half real, half warp, has a kind of ambient memory, an echo of every scream, every drop of stolen life. Some Archons supposedly tap into this, drawing power or influence from past acts of cruelty. In a way, every act of violence becomes part of the city's economic current, like a signature in a ledger carved from living bone. So yeah, if you're wondering what counts as currency in Commorragh, it's not something you carry, it's something you inflict. And the more creatively, the more excruciatingly, the more memorable the suffering, you're not just richer, you're safer. Because in a world where everyone's waiting to betray you, the best protection isn't loyalty. It's the kind of terror that makes people too scared to even consider the idea. In Commorragh, the only thing more valuable than pain is the fear of being on the receiving end of it, and that's what truly buys power in the Dark City. Orcs, man, you've got to hand it to them. They've taken the concept of currency, chewed it up, and spat it out in the most literal, ridiculous, and yet somehow completely functional way imaginable. In Orc society, The universal standard of value isn't gold or credits or energy, it's teeth. Yeah, actual physical teeth, usually orc teeth, called teeth in proper orky dialect. And not only does this system make perfect sense to them, it's self-sustaining. It's like someone took the idea of an economic cycle and then beat it to death with a power claw. Let me explain. Orcs use teeth as money because, well, they grow back. It's part of their biology. They're these big, fungal, spore-based creatures that regenerate constantly, and teeth are no exception. If you knock out a few teeth in a good scrap, you've basically earned yourself a payday. It's like getting your wallet topped up every time you lose a fight, which, by the way, is a deeply orky concept. Getting your face smashed in? That's not just fun, it's profitable. The teeth system works across clans, warbands, and even planetary divides. Whether you're a Goth or a Death Skull, everyone agrees. Teeth are legit. They're easy to carry, easy to count, and best of all, they rot. That's right, teeth decay over time. So if you're sitting on a pile of teeth for too long, they'll literally fall apart. Which means there's no hoarding. You have to spend them. It's the most orky anti-inflation mechanism ever. You want to stay rich? Keep fighting. Keep losing teeth. Keep collecting from others. Keep spending. And honestly, that constant cycle of spend-earn-fight is what keeps orc society from collapsing under its own madness. Imagine if orcs could hoard wealth. They'd start building banks, creating loans, hiring accountants. It'd be a disaster. So instead, the system naturally resets itself. Old teeth go bad, new teeth come in. And the whole thing runs on violence, growth, and the sheer biological absurdity of these green lunatics. There are tons of fan theories about why this works so well. Some people think the warped nature of orc belief plays into it, that their collective psychic field reinforces the concept of teeth as money. Like, they all believe teeth are valuable, so they are valuable. Doesn't matter that it's biologically unstable and grotesque. It functions because they believe it does. There's a kind of raw, primal genius in that. If enough orcs believe a rusty spoon is worth 100 teeth, it probably will be, until someone hits you with it and takes it back. But it's not just a free-for-all. There's an actual logic to what things cost. A chopper might go for 3 teeth. A shooter, maybe 5. A buggy could be a dozen or more. War bosses can get paid in hundreds of teeth for leading a war, and mech boys charge premium prices for custom DACA. The more brutal, flashy, or explodey the item, the higher the price. And since everything's so violently temporary, guns jam, tanks explode, and boys die, the market never gets stale. And the coolest part? It's not just orc teeth that count. They prefer their own, yeah, but a particularly big squig tooth or even a massive alien fang might fetch a decent price if it's impressive enough. There's this idea that the story behind the tooth adds value. Like, oi, this one came from a nid bigger than a truck. And suddenly it's worth triple what it should be. In a way, orc economy is half cash, half boasting rights. You're not just buying gear, you're buying the tail that comes with it. Also, teeth have this beautifully brutal quality control system. If you try to cheat with a fake or dead teeth, you get your head kicked in. No bureaucrats, no arbitration, just immediate kinetic feedback. It's crude, but it works. In fact, it works better than most Imperial markets, if we're being honest. At least there's no fine print, just fine fists. There are also implications that teeth are graded based on freshness and size. Narbizi have bigger teeth, worth more. Grots have tiny ones, basically worthless. So even within the system, there's a natural hierarchy. The stronger you are, the more valuable your teeth, the more money you carry in your own mouth. It's weirdly poetic in an orky way. Your ability to spend is tied to your ability to survive a beating and keep your jaw attached. And then there's the mechs. Oh, the mechs. These lunatics basically run the orc version of industrial production, and they don't accept just any teeth. Some of them demand prime cuts, perfectly shaped, uncracked, straight from the gums of a worthy boy. There are even rumors of mech collectives that grade teeth by color, texture, and symmetry, which is hilarious because it means there are entire teeth-forging rackets in some war bands trying to pass off polished squig molars as knob-grade currency. As you can imagine, that kind of counterfeiting ends with a lot of missing limbs. Still, for all its chaos, the TIF economy is one of the most stable systems in the entire galaxy. Seriously. It doesn't rely on astropaths. It doesn't need the warp. It's immune to inflation, sabotage, or data corruption. It's just teeth. And as long as there are orcs bashing each other's faces in, there will always be teeth to trade. And maybe that's the most orky thing of all. They don't need trust, banks, or systems of credit. Their economy is immediate, violent, and personal. You want something, you punch someone, take their teeth, and spend them before they rot. It's barbaric, it's hilarious, and it works. In the endless meat grinder of the galaxy, the orcs figured out how to build a functioning, decentralized, anti-hoarding economy powered by fists and fangs. Only the orcs could make that make sense. When you start talking about the Tau Empire, you have to throw away everything you've learned from the Imperium, the orcs, chaos, literally all of it. Because the Tau don't just have a different economy, they have a different mentality about what currency even is. It's not just about resources or labor or even wealth. It's about trust, about purpose, about serving the greater good. And yeah, that sounds like propaganda, and it is, but the scary part is, they actually believe it. That's what makes it work. The Tau don't really run on cash the way humans or orcs do. Sure, there's a standardized form of digital credit they use for logistical purposes, especially in interspecies interactions or when they deal with vassal races like the Kroot or the Vespid, but internally. Their economy is more of a meritocratic allocation system, heavily monitored and centrally controlled by the ethereal caste. Your worth isn't measured by what you can hoard, but by what you contribute. And in return, you receive what you need to continue that contribution. Sounds utopian, right? Until you realize how tightly that's controlled, and how ideologically loaded it all is. Everything is filtered through the lens of the greater good. Need a new set of armor? The Firecast Quartermaster evaluates whether you're doing your duty effectively enough to be worth the investment. Want your children to be educated in a higher-tier learning dome? That depends on your societal function and how well your family has integrated with the communal goals. The ethereal caste doesn't just oversee the economy, they shape reality around it. If they say resources should go to agricultural infrastructure instead of medical research, it happens. No protests, no stock crashes, just cold, efficient reallocation. What's wild is that it actually functions. The Tau are efficient, precise, and coordinated to a level that makes Imperial scribes cry blood out of jealousy. But it's not because they fear punishment. It's because they've been conditioned, some say genetically engineered, to believe that serving the system is better than serving the self. That's the foundation of their currency of trust. The idea that doing what you're told is the best possible investment, not just for society, but for you. Some fans argue that the Tau's true currency isn't digital credits. It's reputation, baked into algorithms and assessments run by drones, bureaucrats, and ethereal advised councils. A kind of social credit system, but without the dystopian grime you see in human versions, more like a benevolent evaluation network. You're not rewarded for being rich. You're rewarded for being useful, obedient, effective. Your access to housing, supplies, and luxuries scales with your rating in the greater good's eyes. And that rating isn't something you see. It's something you feel. It's in the glances your neighbors give you, the assignment you receive next quarter, the tone in your supervisor's voice when they address you. And for those wondering how the Tau handle trade across their vassal races, yeah, there's a layer of hard economics there. Kroot mercenaries are usually paid in things they find valuable: weapons, genetic material, or food sources. Vespid like resonance crystals and high-frequency communication tools. The Necasser. They mostly just want to be left alone to float and think. But all of these are managed within the Empire's centralized system. You don't just go to a market and haggle. You submit a requisition, you prove value, and then you receive your due. There's also a strange sense of voluntary obedience in how the Tau handle inequality. Some castes, like the Earth caste, do the hard, gritty labor. They get fewer luxuries. They work longer hours. But they don't rebel because they're trained from birth to believe their role is essential and honorable. They feel pride in their function. That pride becomes part of the economic fabric, like an emotional currency that stabilizes everything. You don't need to bribe someone who genuinely believes they're fulfilling a noble destiny by tightening bolts or cleaning plasma vents. But don't think for a second this makes the Tau soft. Their economy might run on harmony, but it's still a weapon. They can shut down dissidents by freezing resource access. They can silence critics by denying opportunities, reassigning housing, or simply re-educating them until they believe again. It's control disguised as generosity, and it works frighteningly well. There's a theory among fans that the ethereal caste has access to subtle pheromonal manipulation or low-level psychic influence, something that keeps everyone just docile enough to avoid collapse. Whether that's true or not, the results speak for themselves. One of the most fascinating fan ideas I've come across is the notion that Tau credits might not just be numeric values, but blockchain-like tokens tied to state-approved activities. So instead of buying something because you have X amount of credits, you're granted access because you performed Y amount of civic function. It's transactional, yes, but not capitalistic. It's conditional trust. The moment you betray the greater good, those permissions vanish. It's elegant, terrifying, and very Tau. And the bigger implication here? They don't want other races to just trade with them. They want you to join, to convert. Because once you buy into their economy, you're buying into their ideology. The moment you accept a Tau favor, a Tau credit, a Tau supply chain, you're already part of the machine. That's the hidden brilliance. Their economy isn't just about resources. It's a conversion tool, a soft colonization through infrastructure, logistics, and help. So while other factions fight for wealth, for power, for survival, the Tau offer you a seat at the table, not as a ruler, as a cog, a trusted cog, and in their eyes, that's the highest currency there is. Now this is where things get strange, colder, emptier, and altogether less human. Because when we start talking about the Necrons, we're not just stepping outside of traditional economics, we're stepping outside of need. These are beings that don't eat, don't sleep, don't age, and in many cases don't even feel. So how do you even begin to talk about value, wealth, or currency when the species in question is basically immune to every material impulse that drives galactic trade? Let's start with the obvious. The Necrons don't use money, not in the way anyone else in the galaxy does. There are no coin vaults under their tomb worlds, no scribes logging transactions, no market bazaars humming with activity. The Necrons operate on command, hierarchy, and function. If something needs doing, it gets done because the Overlord wills it, or because the protocols embedded in the command code say it must. There's no negotiation, no bargaining, just cold absolute directive. Resources aren't exchanged, they're allocated, often by silent, ancient machines that have been running the same distribution cycle since before the birth of the Imperium. But that doesn't mean the Necrons are incapable of understanding value. It's just that their version of value is so far removed from anything emotional or instinctive that it's almost alien. What they consider precious is usually related to preservation, functionality, or legacy. A particularly rare form of Blackstone, a functioning ancient star map, or a fragment of a long-lost command protocol. Those things matter. Not because they're expensive, but because they represent continuity, stability, control. For a species that saw its own mortality as a curse and willingly traded away their souls to escape it, permanence is the only real currency. Now, when it comes to the rare cases where Necrons do interact with other races in a way that might be called trade, things get interesting. There are legends, half-whispers really, of Necron dynasties making bargains with certain rogue traders, Tau envoys, or even inquisitors. Not for wealth, but for information, or silence, or temporary non-interference. And what's even more disturbing is that the Necrons honor these pacts, at least for as long as it suits their logic. I once read a fan theory that Necrons maintain something like a virtual ledger, not for profit, but for calculating behavioral prediction models. Every time they trade with a lesser species, they're collecting data. How easily can this race be manipulated? How likely are they to break agreements? What stimuli produce loyalty versus betrayal? It's not about the deal. It's about the experiment. The transaction is a test, and every response goes into a massive cognitive archive buried somewhere beneath a tomb complex the size of a continent. There's also some debate among loreheads about the existence of so-called neo-credits. Not an actual currency per se, but a theorized form of abstract value used only in the higher councils of Necron society, maybe between rival overlords or competing cryptechs. The idea is that neo-credits could represent favors, ranks of prestige, or future access to sacred technologies like tesseract vaults or phase gate schematics. Of course, this is mostly speculation, but it would make sense in a culture where direct material trade is meaningless and only status and access matter. After all, when you don't need to eat or build wealth, your only real resource is control over what's allowed. Another fascinating angle comes from their use of lesser species. The Necrons rarely enslave mortals in the traditional sense, but there are recorded instances of them maintaining client species or local populations for specific purposes, usually as biological tools. In those situations, some form of exchange can occur, maybe not with coins, but with protection, sustenance, or techno-sorcery. Imagine being a tribal leader on a half-dead world and receiving a sealed crate from the sky. Inside is a black obelisk that purifies your water supply for 10 generations. The message? Do not build cities. Do not dig in certain zones. Do not approach the pyramids. That's trade in its most existential form, and in a way, it's terrifyingly efficient. The Necrons don't need to negotiate terms. They just enforce them. No loopholes, no diplomacy, no corruption. If you obey, you benefit. If you don't, you vanish in a green flash of Gauss fire. The transaction is enforced by eternity itself. The thing is, even within their own hierarchy, you get the sense that the Necrons don't pay one another. Not really. Instead, influence flows through lineage, memory, and code. If a lesser lord wants access to a powerful cryptech's research or a higher tier of command protocols, he doesn't bribe him. He demonstrates capability, success, strategy, loyalty to the dynasty. These intangible assets replace any need for traditional currency. It's all about function. You are what you prove. The economy is built into their operating systems. But not all dynasties are equal. Some Necrons, especially those whose programming has degraded or whose personalities are more intact, show signs of vanity, ambition, even a twisted sense of desire. For them, artifacts from the war in heaven, trophies of fallen Xenos champions, or rare psychic phenomena might hold a strange, fetishistic value. Again, not because they're worth something in the market, but because they reflect identity. For a race that sacrificed its soul to escape death, any reminder of individuality becomes priceless. And here's the wildest theory I've heard. Some fans think the Silent King himself maintains a kind of galactic debt register. Not financial, but philosophical. A record of who owes what across time, who betrayed whom, which species failed to stop the fall of the galaxy into madness. It's not a list of enemies. It's a list of debts to be collected. In that sense, the Necrons' version of currency may not be what they trade, but what they intend to reclaim. So do the Necrons understand value? Absolutely. But to them, value is about order, about purpose, about restoring what was lost and ensuring that it can never be taken again. They don't trade for pleasure. They don't consume for satisfaction. They simply act with the cold precision of beings who have lived long enough to forget why anyone ever needed money in the first place. When we talk about money in Warhammer 40K, it's easy to get caught up in the grand systems, the thrones of the Imperium, the genetic barter of the orcs, the ideological economy of the Tau. But those are the visible layers, the official mechanisms. Beneath all of that, in the smoke-choked shadows between systems and on the hulls of forgotten void ships, there's another kind of economy. One that doesn't care for governments or dogma. One that functions in war zones, on dead worlds, and in the cold edges of the void. This is the black economy, the currency of pirates, smugglers, mercenaries, scavengers, and outcasts. And let me tell you, it's as raw and ruthless as the galaxy itself. There is no standard coin in these circles, no credit system, no shared bank. The closest thing to a universal currency here is utility. What can be used, what can be traded, what can be threatened. You want to pay for safe passage through a raider-infested region? You bring something they need. Weapons, ammunition, information, slaves, maybe narcotics if they're dealing with hedonists or Xeno syndicates. Sometimes even a body, dead or alive depending on the market. Weapons are probably the most reliable currency in the underworld. A well-maintained bolter, a Laskerbine with a working charge pack, or a crate of autogun magazines can buy you more than a pile of thrones ever could. These things aren't symbolic. They're survival. In places where no one trusts banks and the warp beats communication lines, firepower is value, and the heavier, the better. There are stories of rogue traders paying entire mercenary companies in plasma coils and melta charges. Forget the pay slips. Just give them what they need to fight, and they'll die happy. Then there's the slave trade. It's ugly and almost universally condemned on paper. But in practice, it's everywhere. The Drukhari fuel it, of course, but so do chaos war bands, pirate captains, and desperate governors looking to cut costs. Bodies are labor. Bodies are currency. If you can deliver 100 able-bodied workers to a mining operation on a dying rock, you've just made yourself rich. Doesn't matter if they're conscripts, criminals, or rescued refugees. The system doesn't ask questions. And narcotics, oh, they're a whole economy in themselves. The Imperium pretends to suppress it, but everyone knows stim rush, fire dust, dream wine, and even Xenos hallucinogens flow through the underhive and the void like blood through veins. These drugs are manufactured in backwater labs or harvested from alien biomes, then smuggled in relic crates, packed in servitor guts, or disguised as incense shipments. Entire crime syndicates form around their distribution, and in some sectors, a single vial of refined psycher essence is worth more than a tank, especially if it enhances cognition, suppresses trauma, or just makes the hellscape of the galaxy feel a little less sharp. Tribute is another fascinating layer, especially among nomadic fleets and chaos-aligned raiders. You don't always buy safety. You offer tribute to buy time. Maybe it's a tithe of fuel. Maybe it's a captured saint's relic. Maybe it's just a blood oath and a vow of non-interference. But it works. Some pirate flotillas maintain entire economies built on monthly tributes from fringe worlds. A governor sends out an offering, food, weapons, volunteers, and the pirates skip that system during their next raid. Break the chain, and the wrath comes swift. Tribute becomes a form of rent, protection money, scaled to terror. Even data plays a massive role. In the black markets, a map of an unmarked warp corridor can be worth more than gold. A list of astropathic frequencies, a record of inquisitorial movements, the location of a forgotten Mechanicus cache. These aren't just secrets, they're assets. They change wars, reroute fleets, decide fates. Some data dealers implant their memories into cloned brains and send the clones off on decoy missions just to protect the real intel. Others encrypt their minds with psychic glyphs, so only the right buyer can decode them without burning their soul. And people pay for this, not with credits, but with favors, soldiers, relics, whatever it takes. There's also this strange etiquette in pirate and smuggler circles, a kind of grim honor among thieves. Deals are sealed with blood, cybernetic codes, or even oaths sworn under the gaze of warp entities. You don't just break a deal casually in the underworld. Reputation is everything. You screw someone once, and you don't just lose trade, you get blacklisted or hunted. There's an entire shadow economy around favors, a ship repaid with fuel for a rescue, a crew sheltered during an inquisitorial sweep, a a tech priest saved from an execution. These debts float around the galaxy like invisible threads, waiting to be pulled. And what about the Xenos? Plenty of smugglers trade with alien races no matter what the ecclesiarchy says. Tau-Tech, Elder Crystalware, Orc Squig Meat. Some of these goods are banned, some are sacred, some are alive, and all of them are valuable in the right places. The trade ports around Footfall and similar stations in the Coronis Expanse are filled with whispered deals and cargo holds sealed with curses. You don't need a license, just enough firepower to defend your right to sell. Sometimes the economy itself becomes the weapon. Raiders blockade a planet and starve it until the locals pay in children or sacred artifacts. Mercenaries switch sides mid-battle because someone offered them a better deal. Maybe not in thrones, but in command posts or access to safe havens. And when things get truly desperate, fleets will trade loyalty. Entire ships pledge to a warlord's banner in exchange for safety, food, or a place in the next conquest. There are no rules, only terms, and terms change fast. That's what makes this all so fascinating and terrifying. There's no stability, no authority. But somehow, the shadow economy still thrives. In fact, in many places it's more functional than the Imperium's own supply lines. Because it doesn't rely on faith or loyalty, just need, hunger, desperation. And in a galaxy where planets burn and armies die for nothing, sometimes the best currency is simply being useful to the right kind of monster. So, what's the universal currency in a galaxy at war? It's whatever keeps your ship flying, your crew fed, and your enemies hesitant. Ammo, slaves, secrets, and above all, fear. Fear buys silence. Fear buys mercy. Fear buys time. And time in the 41st millennium is a luxury very few can afford. In Warhammer 40k, war isn't just constant. It's everything. It's the default state of the galaxy. Entire planets are born into it. Species are defined by it. And in a universe where a single conflict can erase solar systems, you start to wonder, who's paying for all of this? What does it actually cost to unleash a crusade? To fuel a Space Marine chapter for centuries? To drop a Titan Legion onto a heretic world and watch it burn? Let's start with the obvious. War in the Imperium isn't just financed by thrones or credits. It's paid for in flesh, in devotion, in extinction-level sacrifice. Tithes aren't just taxes, they're blood contracts. Every planet that survives long enough to be part of the Imperium owes a price. Some pay in crops, some in ore, some in raw promethium. But many, they pay in people. Every guardsman you see marching toward the trenches of Armageddon is a living coin, withdrawn from a vault of planetary birth rates and hurled into the fire. And it doesn't stop there. When an entire Astra Militarum regiment is requested, say 100,000 troops with armor, artillery, and support staff, it isn't simply dispatched. It's assembled, often by force. The Departamento Munitorum calculates quotas based on population, prior compliance, military need, and then demands those bodies. If your planet doesn't deliver, penal legions, sanctions, orbital punishment, or in the worst cases, exterminatus. Some fans call this the economy of death, because for the Imperium, throwing bodies at a problem is the most available and expendable resource they have. The lives of citizens are weighed not in worth, but in volume. One death is meaningless. 10 million? That's a valid campaign budget. But of course, you also need gear. Tanks, guns, ships, food. That's where the Forge Worlds come in. The Adeptus Mechanicus receives its own tithes, sometimes in raw materials, sometimes in rare archaeotech, sometimes just in the form of planetary compliance. In exchange, they manufacture everything from bolt shells to battle cruisers. But here's the twist. None of this is done on a whim. Every requisition for war requires paperwork, layers of it. Years, sometimes decades of bureaucratic grease before a Titan can be moved from one war zone to another. Fans love to joke that by the time you get your requested Baneblade, the war is over and your regiment is a myth. So who pays for the really big stuff? The Titans, the Void fleets, the Exterminatus-capable cyclonic torpedoes. That comes from Segmentum Command, or even Terra itself. The High Lords of Terra, acting through the Adeptus Administratum, allocate these resources like a miser flicking crumbs to starving dogs. These are not simple exchanges. They're political moves, religious gestures, strategic investments that may not yield return for centuries, if ever. And make no mistake, there is return expected. Every campaign is expected to justify itself. If a crusade costs 1 billion thrones and 10 billion lives, there better be something at the end. A relic reclaimed, a heresy crushed, a planet retaken. If the gains don't match the cost, someone pays. Maybe it's a governor getting quietly disappeared. Maybe it's a Lord Militant left to rot. Or maybe it's an entire planet reclassified as resource only and drained dry to pay back the failure. Let's not forget the Astartes either. Space Marines are expensive, not just in the genetic sense, but logistically. Their war gear is ancient, hand-forged, ritually maintained. Every bolt gun round is a relic. Every drop of gene seed is sacred. When a chapter deploys, even partially, it's a major event. They don't show up to skirmishes. They show up when there's something worth reshaping worlds over. And when they do, they expect the hosting forces to support them. That means honor duels for resource allocation. That means cities emptied to feed their orbiting strike cruisers. That means entire PDF divisions reassigned to serve as cleanup crews. And then there's the Navy. Emperor help you if you have to finance an Imperial Navy operation. A single lunar-class cruiser takes centuries to build, crew, and sanctify. Fueling it for warp travel? Astronomical. Staffing it? Tens of thousands of souls. And we haven't even touched the cost of maintaining the Black Ships, the Inquisition's transports, the Navigator's contracts, or the astropathic relays that let any of this function. So what is war paid with? The answer is horrifyingly simple. Everything. Every ounce of material, every drop of blood, every second of time. The Imperium throws its own existence into the meat grinder every day just to hold the line. But it's not just the Imperium. Chaos pays with corruption. Every traitor Astartes is a debt unpaid. Every demon weapon forged in agony is a promise to a god. Their economy is fueled by betrayal, soul debt, and ritual sacrifice. And they don't forget. The longer you fight in their name, the more you owe. And eventually, they collect. Xenos forces have their own methods. Orcs pay for war by having war. More fighting means more loot, which funds more fighting. The Tyranids pay by consuming everything and rolling it into biomass. The Tau justify war through social unity, conquests that enrich the greater good. The Necrons, they don't pay, they simply act. To them, war is a cleanup operation. But let's be honest, no matter the faction, the true cost of war in this universe is hope. Hope sacrificed, hope traded, hope spent like bullets. And that's maybe the most chilling part. Because every war is pitched as necessary, every campaign is a last stand. But the machinery behind it, it's ancient, rusted, and grinding forward forever. So, who pays for war in Warhammer 40K? Everyone. The living, the dead, the unborn. They pay in time, in blood, in silence. Because in a galaxy where there is only war, the only real currency left is what you're willing to lose. So after all that, after digging through the ash-choked ruins of war zones, slipping through Xeno slums, dodging black market pirates, and gazing into the soulless stare of a Necron overlord, what even is currency in the 41st millennium? Is it thrones, teeth, pain, promises? Or is it something far worse, debt without end? A galaxy where every heartbeat, every step, every scream is either an offering to a god, a unit of fuel for a war machine, or a receipt for someone else's suffering. It feels like in this universe, currency isn't really about what you own. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. Some pay with their minds, some with their flesh, some with their faith. The Imperium throws bodies into the void by the billion and calls it service. The Drukhari bottle screams and treat agony like coinage. Orcs bash your face in, and use your teeth to buy ammo. Tau trade in loyalty and call it peace. And the Necrons? They're the only ones who don't seem to need anything, but maybe that's because they already paid the ultimate price a long time ago. Their souls. The more you look at it, the more you realize value is subjective, but in the 41st millennium, it's weaponized. It's been melted down, mutated, and reshaped into whatever suits the needs of the ruling class, the warlords, the cults, or the tech priests of Mars. Reality itself is fragile, and that makes the idea of worth even more twisted. In a place where planets are born and die in a single campaign, what can you possibly say a life is worth? A bag of grain? A box of last cartridges? A few moments of psychic silence before the next demonic incursion begins? And I think that's what hits the hardest. Currency here isn't just economic, it's existential. It's a measure of control in a place where nothing is certain. In a warp-scorched galaxy teetering between oblivion and stagnation, money becomes less about trade and more about identity. What you spend defines who you are. What you offer determines if you live. And what you believe in, well, sometimes that belief is the only thing you actually own. And even that can be taxed. Some fans like to imagine that if you could peel back the layers of every major faction's economy, you'd find the same core truth underneath. Desperation. No one is doing great. Everyone is adapting. The Imperium's bureaucracy grinds on not because it works, but because there's no other option. Orcs don't care because their chaos is their system. The Tau think they're doing better, but even they rely on controlled scarcity to maintain obedience. And chaos? Chaos just watches and laughs, because in the end, everything is a transaction, and every transaction is a step closer to corruption. So, yeah, there's no safe haven, no galactic Bitcoin, no interstellar wire transfer that's going to fix any of this. But that's what makes it so fascinating to talk about, because when currency becomes warped, broken, alive, it tells you everything about the world that uses it. It becomes a reflection of the species, their fears, their needs, and their inevitable decline. And now I want to hear your take. What's the weirdest currency you think could exist in the galaxy? Do you think pain has more value than labor? Would you rather deal with a Tau quartermaster or a Drukhari soul auctioneer? Drop your theories in the comments, especially the weird ones. I'm always looking for the strangest edge cases of galactic barter. And if you've made it this far, you clearly love this messed up universe as much as I do. So hit that subscribe button, because I've got more lore dives, economic madness, and speculative horror headed your way. Next time, we might talk about what actually happens to all those abandoned STC fragments, and who's quietly collecting them. Or maybe something worse. Until then, keep your bolter close, your credits fluid, and your pain bottled just in case someone's in the market. This is the 41st millennium, and nothing is free.